Hey guys, how's everyone doing? This is Sir Jedi Sentinel, and welcome to an impromptu Sentinel Reviews. It's a few days late, but after thinking about it and putting some thought into it, I decided I really need to talk about this show. So if you didn't see the title, today we are looking at Mrs. Davis. Mrs. Davis is a miniseries that was released on Peacock from April 20th to May 18th, 2023. The series was created by Damon Lindelof and Tara Hernandez and stars, one minute, I had to take notes because, like I said, this is really impromptu, so I didn't really prepare anything. Anyway, Mrs. Davis stars Betty Gilpin, Jake McDorman, Annie McQueen, and Elizabeth Marvel. Also featured are Chris Diamantopoulos, Ben Chaplin, Margot Martindale, and David Arquette. I know this is usually the point where I say, as always, because I'm doing these unscripted, there's a blanket spoiler warning in place just in case. And yeah, that'll still be here, but I'm going to try and avoid spoilers for this as much as possible. Mrs. Davis is very similar to Everything Everywhere All at Once. They don't have the same story or share similar themes. Well, minus one theme. But what I mean in that comparison is that they are much better if you go in blind. If you go in not knowing anything about this show, I think your experience will be better for it. In fact, I would actually say go watch the trailer for this show. Because it's kind of the perfect trailer a perfect trailer in a lot of ways. Like, it gives you a little tease of what the show is about. Like, it gives you a hint. It actually kind of gives you the starting point of the series. But it doesn't give you much more than that. It's not one of those trailers that tells the whole story. And I just kind of recommend it because, like I said, it's really good at giving you a tease without giving everything away, as well as just kind of giving you a sneak preview of the tone of the series, and it does that really well. So Mrs. Davis is sort of a quote-unquote dystopian sci-fi comedy drama. Really thick air quotes around the dystopian because I don't think it qualifies as a true dystopia. Also, I would honestly go so far. The way some of these plot twists in this series unfold and unfurl, I would go so far as to call this a soap opera. Because it is that melodramatic. In a good way, I mean. I feel like when people say soap opera or melodrama, there's kind of a negative connotation to it. And that's not the point at all. The premise of Mrs. Davis, and again, the starting point, I'm not going to give away the entire plot of the show, or at least I'm going to try not to, is that Mrs. Davis is essentially an artificial intelligence, and she kind of runs the world. It's really weird to kind of talk about, because the exact details aren't shown and aren't portrayed, in a way that's done really well, I should say. Like, it's one of those ways where you don't get the full picture, but you don't feel cheated that you don't. Because I know there are, like, some sort of mystery narratives or, some sort of something where if you don't get the full picture, it kind of feels cheap and you kind of feel cheated out of an experience. This is not one of those shows. It's done really well. Anyway, as I said, Mrs. Davis is an artificial intelligence. She's kind of a worldwide app. She essentially runs the world. And as far as what she does, she kind of does everything. She helps people hunt for jobs. People can converse with her. They can get information. It's kind of sort of an assistant, so to speak. Anyway, but Mrs. Davis one day tracks down a nun named Sister Simone, played by Betty Gilpin, who does not like her. Sister Simone does not like the app. Whereas everyone calls her a her, because it's a program, Simone calls her an it, so to speak. Anyway, so Mrs. Davis gives Simone the task to find the Holy Grail. Oh, I should also mention with the sci-fi, there's also fantasy in there as well. And again, that's where the series starts, because right after we get that, it immediately spirals out of control. Like, the comedy is delightful in this series, and one of the ways it really does that is that every episode, minus the finale, ends on a big plot twist or a massive revelation. And then when the next episode starts, that plot twist is played for last. It turns out it's a joke, and it's not actually all that important, but here's what actually is important. Most of the time, there are a few episodes where the major twists are taken seriously. And that's one thing I want to say too, because this series is doing a balancing act between comedy and drama, and it does it really well. Like, the way this series blends the two tones and the two genres, they sort of flow seamlessly into each other. There's never any sense of tonal whiplash. In those early episodes, I was worried, it's like, oh, we keep shifting from comedy to drama. Is there going to be a moment where a joke falls out of place, or we suddenly have this serious moment in the middle of something silly? And thankfully, that never happens. It's really, like I said, the comedy and the drama are really well balanced. As for the performances, everyone is amazing. You know, like I said, you have actors who are always great in whatever they do, like character actress Margot Martindale. I'm sorry, ever since I saw BoJack Horseman, I'm gonna keep that joke going. Anytime Margot Martindale is in something, I am going to refer to her as character actress Margot Martindale. And she's fantastic. She always is. I love Margot Martindale. But the real standouts for me are Betty Gilpin as Sister Simone, the series' lead, and Elizabeth Marvel as Celeste, Simone's mother. They have to do some of the most emotional heavy lifting in this series, and they are so well done. Betty Gilpin, in particular, she makes choices that initially may seem kind of odd or might not match what's going on, but she carries it through in a way that's just breathtaking to watch. Like, her acting is like poetry in motion, and she's really what grounds the series. Like, the series can get really crazy at times, but you never lose your suspension of disbelief, because Gilpin is really grounding the series and giving these realistic, beautiful reactions. One of my favorites, I'm trying to remember which one it was her reaction to a reveal at the end of episode 6. She finally speaks to Mrs. Davis herself. I should mention at this point, Mrs. Davis has various proxies talk to her. Like, they put in an earpiece, Mrs. Davis talks to them, and they give Simone the dialogue she's speaking. Simone, at the end of episode 6, is put into a position where she has to speak directly to Mrs. Davis. We never hear Mrs. Davis's side of things, because it's, again, building up to another reveal, but Gilpin's acting alone is spectacular to watch. And like I said, she is consistently, at least for me, the best thing about this series. And like I said, this series goes to some pretty crazy places, so there is one thing I will spoil, just to give you a taste of how insane this series gets. So between jobs, or while she's looking for the Grail, Simone regularly goes to this restaurant and converses with the cook and server, a man named Jay, who kind of gives her information and kind of gives her leads on where to go and what to pursue. And at one point, she meets someone else in the restaurant, and she calls Jay her husband. Because this series takes the moniker for nuns, Brides of Christ, and does it literally. Jay is Jay is Simone's husband, and Jay is Jesus Christ. And basically, every instance of Simone going to this restaurant and speaking with Jay and getting this information, it's all happening in, I don't want to say in her head, but basically whenever she's in prayer. And the series kind of does some spectacular things with it, especially in episode 7. Episodes 7 and 8 might be my favorite episodes in this series. Especially episode 8, like, for a miniseries, because, you know, you're not being renewed, obviously. There's a lot of plot threads you have to tie up, and you have to make sure to give a satisfying ending, and Mrs. Davis sticks the landing. One other thing I want to say, too, is that, because I mentioned earlier in one of the plot reveals we get, Simone puts in an earpiece and speaks directly to Mrs. Davis. A few of our main characters do this, and we never actually hear or meet Mrs. Davis in any impactful, meaningful way, which is a really smart decision, I feel. Like when it first happened with Simone, it was like, oh, that you're not gonna tell us what Mrs. Davis said or anything. And it was like, and I get it for that context, that because obviously, again, because of plot stuff that I'm trying not to give away, it's obvious they're building up to another reveal, a really shocking reveal, by the way. But then, we have several of our other main characters interact directly with Mrs. Davis, not through a proxy, and we never hear her voice. And the more I thought about it, the more I like this. This series knows how to do, like, ambiguity well. Like, I've said this before with some things. I don't think ever on my channel, but there is a difference between being ambiguous and being unresolved. Being ambiguous means that there is a level of audience interpretation that goes into something. What did something happen? Did something not? Like, what's a good example? Inception. The ending of Inception, in fact, when Leonardo DiCaprio spins the top before leaving and it falters a little bit. It's like, did the top stop spinning or what have you? Like, is Leonardo DiCaprio awake or is he still in a dream? That is ambiguity. And then there is being unresolved, which is a plot point that is essentially unfinished or never addressed again. My example of this is the ending of the Doctor Who Series 9 episode, Sleep No More. Or, now that I think about it too, the ending of the Disney Plus series Willow, because that series was canceled. Again, just to kind of round out my point and speak around in circles again, there is a difference between being ambiguous and being unresolved, and Mrs. Davis masterfully does ambiguity, and it's done so well. Trying to think, there's other things I want to talk about. Like, do I want to go into one of our, before I went off on kind of all those tangents, I was talking about the performances. So Betty Gilpin as our lead, Sister Simone, is the highlight of this series. She gives one of the best performances. When I was looking into stuff, because I was trying to find people to talk to this series about, I hear there is some Emmy consideration for her. I don't put much stock in award shows, but I hope she wins. Like, I first heard about this because there were articles that were dropped about how Mrs. Davis, the production crew and stuff, had switched Emmy consideration from, series from the series categories to the limited series categories or the miniseries categories. So, like I said, Betty Gilpin's performance throughout this entire series, I hope she gets some accolades for it, because it is utterly phenomenal, and I would honestly recommend, on that feat alone, seeing the series. I talked about Jay a little bit, played by Andy McQueen. He's good. He's kind of one of the weaker performances, but never to the point of being bad. He's still good, but just the routine he and Simone and Betty Gilpin get through as Simone and Jay kind of gets repetitive a little bit, especially in those middle episodes. I can't tell you where I think it exactly starts, because, like I said, just their dialogue and their interactions kind of start getting repetitive. My other favorite performance in this series is Elizabeth Marvel as Simone's mother, Celeste. She starts off very cold, very callous, almost one-dimensional in the way she's portrayed, but as the series goes on, the layers are peeled back, and you just get and you see that there is a lot more to Celeste than you initially thought, and, and just like the scenes in the final episode between her and Betty Gilpin are probably some of my favorite moments in this series. Like, they are playing off each other so well. They have a great chemistry, and it's just really good acting. Like, as crazy and madcap as this story is, and I love things that go from zero to insane, they're some of my favorite media to consume, and this series has it in spades. The phenomenal acting is just what makes this series work. I am talking around in circles. Again, this is very impromptu. So that really just brings us to our last lead, Jake McDorman as Wiley, or Preston Wiley. He's got one of those bougie rich names, so he just goes by Wiley. He's a really interesting character, and McDormand has also a really good performance. He's also where a lot of the humor in this series comes from. Like, he is leading a resistance who are also opposed to Mrs. Davis the way Simone is, only they're actively fighting against it, and everything with the resistance is gold. They are some of the most hilarious parts of this series, and it's where most of the comedy comes in, aside from, you know, lampshading the big dramatic twists that the series has. But Wiley is Simone's ex, and, you know, as they go on this adventure together to find the Holy Grail, a lot of their baggage is coming out now that they're in extended contact with each other. And I like that it's done in a way that's not bitter. I feel like when you have characters that are exes in fiction, there's a tendency to write them being really bitter and angry about it. And, you know, eventually before they kind of make up and become a couple again. Spoilers, that this series does that, but it doesn't do the former, thankfully. And I really like that. I really like that it shows, hey, exes can still communicate right like regular people and be friends with each other. I really applaud the series for doing that and not going with the trope of them just being bitter and angry about their breakup. What else do I want to talk about? Because, well, you know, trying to avoid some of the crazy spoilers in this really kind of limits you. And I feel like because I am doing this so impromptu, I'm just talking around in circles. I don't know how many times I've repeated myself at this point. So let me see where we're at in terms of recording. I think I'm going to call it good there. So, like, one of the reasons I'm making this video and wanting to talk about this series is because, you know, I wanted to find people to talk about it. I looked in all the Discord groups I was in. No one was watching it. No one was talking about it. I looked on Twitter. No one was talking about it. And the people I could find talking about it were all tweeting the same thing. Mrs. Davis is a really great show. Why is no one talking about it? And I think it's because it's on Peacock. Now, which in the streaming wars, not really wars, Peacock is kind of the one that gets mocked. I won't get too into it. I don't know all the details. It could be because Peacock was one of the last ones to jump into the pool, or it could be because Peacock is NBC, and NBC kind of seems to be a laughingstock because it's considered the old people channel. I don't know. In the US, Mrs. Davis airs on Peacock. If you have Peacock, check it out. Internationally, it's on HBO Max. It's a fantastic show. It's really fun, really melodramatic, really great, really crazy, but with phenomenal acting and great performances that ground it and make it something really special. I really hope people will check this show out. Like, password share your Peacock accounts with your friends, or find a way to watch this show. I don't know how. Trust me, it's worth it. But those are just my thoughts. Have you seen Mrs. Davis? If so, start a conversation in the comments below. I always encourage conversation. Remember to like, comment, subscribe. Click the bell next to subscribe to get notifications when I upload. Share the video around. All of it helps my channel grow. And in the description box below, you will find the link to my Twitter, where, for the time being, you can follow me and get updates on the channel. So until next time, this is Sir Jedi Sentinel, and I'll see you guys around.